The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, so this time last week we looked at, excuse me, tissues and histology. And so one area that I want you to take a look at is this website called Web Anatomy. You can use it for more than just with the tissues. You can use it with a lot of other topics in 101 and also in 102. So it is a MS Jensen Web Anatomy, and so there's a self-test area, and if you click on the self-test area, I clicked on histology, you notice that it comes in with short, medium list on this one, for example. And if we click on histology 1 short, it will give you a list that's only long enough to give you 10 answers like this, 10 answers here. And so all these answers will apply, will be the same, whether you're looking at number 1 or number 5. They don't change from one to another. And so, for example, if we just randomly put in, I won't even look, I'm just going to randomly put in some answers to these slides to the right. And after you do that, you can check your answers, which is kind of nice too. It lets you know what you need to study more. So here's the pictures of the histology slides 1 through 10, and like I said, I didn't even look at them. I just randomly picked answers for you to look at. Then when you get done, you come down here and you score your test. After you score your test, you go back over here to the right hand side, and it tells you how good or bad you did. And in this case, we missed quite a few. But there's the correct answer. So it's a good positive feedback right away, so you have an idea what's going on. Then what you can do is go back, and that was the short list. If you want to make things a little tougher for you, you get a medium or a long list. They'll give you more options to choose from, and that way you can narrow it down even more. And what's nice about this will tell you what slides that you need to take a closer look at. And so here's another histology one. So not all these slides are the same as what you had before, and so they're going to cover all 4 basic types. When we talked about them before, we talked about muscle, connective tissue, epithelial, and also nerve tissue. So they're all covered here. Then another area right here, they're specifically looking at only epithelial tissue. And there's, if you remember, epithelial tissue they name by how many layers there are and shapes. So you'll see the terms simple or stratified, and you'll see terms like cuboidal, squamous, and columnar. Also on this one, they had a connective tissue one. And remember, connective tissue has the widest variety of different types of tissue. And there's the short list for that. So you can pick specifically epithelial or connective. And then we have down here, which we have some other times, histology questions that you may have for other types of subjects, basic questions you can answer. So these are all going to be true and false. And it does the same thing. If I just went through and didn't even read them, and I clicked on true on all these, I think there's 10. But then I could score the test right away, and that gives you an idea. Hey, I already know this part. I don't have to focus on that. I can now focus on the ones that I missed. You know, why did I miss that? I need to go back and review that. So it's pretty good that you get immediate feedback through this site as well. And so in a little while, we will come back and we'll take a look at the integument. There's not a lot here for the integument. That you may have to go out to some other areas to do some practice with. Plus you have some study areas with your textbook and the company as well. Okay, so let's look at what we are having a look at today. Today we went from tissues, and so now we're looking at the integument system. Integument system is when we talk about your skin, your hair, your nails, things like that, a broad variety of jobs and functions for us. So here's a list of those. Maintains homeostasis. So a lot of our systems, we want them to help us have that nice internal balance and be in homeostasis. Regulates temperature. You know, today it's very, very cold outside. The wind chills are going to get below 20, and you probably would dress differently today than you would in the middle of August. But your skin, your integument system, can also help you with regulating that temperature by sweating or shivering, depending on what's going on. Protective covering. So if you think how many times in your life you've bumped yourself against objects, tables, chairs, whatever, your skin gets punched and pushed and prodded all the time. So the skin is very, very protective covering for us. Waterproof. You don't go into the shower and just start to melt. So we've got a waterproof integumentary system function there. Sensory. When we talk about the nervous system, we also, a lot of our systems overlap in helping us maintain homeostasis. So our integumentary system with our nervous system helps us do that. Immunity. We talk about later on in 102, you're going to talk about immunity. And we talk about natural barriers, and your skin as your number one line of defense. Excretion, when we talk about sweating, for example, releasing oils, releasing products that we don't want to hold on to. And then synthesis, we talk about different things that our integument system will help us form with utilizing other things like enzymes and vitamins as well. So here is a picture of the layers of the skin, the basic part of the integument system, and we talk about having three basic layers to it: the epidermis, the dermis, and the subcutaneous. Subcutaneous can also be called hypodermis. So hypo means low, so the lower level. Epi means above. And so if you look at this structure right here, there is a lot going on in this picture. Here's a hair structure. There's an erector pili muscle. You also see blood vessels, so we've got nutrients in that area. You see sweat glands and oil glands. You see pressure sensors. And then even within the epidermis, there's a lot of different layers there that we'll talk about. And then in the subcutaneous layer, the hypodermis, there's where you have connective tissue. There's a lot of fat cells there that are there for an energy source, but also insulation. And so there is a lot that's going on in that area. Let's take a quick look. I've told you this before. You could go to Google, and you can go to Google Images, and you can click on a labeled skin diagram, and you'll have all these choices come up. This one looks like it has a lot labeled on it, and so when you open this up, it has even more labeled on it than what was in on the slide. There's the epidermis, dermis, and there's hypodermis, like I mentioned. Now look at these terms as well. We talk about an eccrine sweat gland. We talk about hair follicle receptors. So when somebody pulls a hair out of your head, or you get your hair snagged on a comb, when you comb it out, there's where you have the pain from. The Meissner's corpuscles, those are there for sensation. We talked about sensory, Vicinian as well. And so we've got these different types of structures. So the dermis is where there's a lot going on, a lot of different types of structures in there. And then the epidermis, that's the top protective layer. We're going to talk about the different layers that we have in those. And then here again, you can see the adipose tissue, the fat, the insulator, the energy source, with vessels. And if you notice, the closer you get to the base here of the dermis, those vessels are a lot larger than those coming on up towards the surface, towards that epidermis. So don't forget to go back to Google Images. You can even find some that will let you label them, and you can check them later. But I'd be willing to bet some of these will show up when you get ready to take a test. So here's one in black and white that's got some labeling with that. It also talks about melanocytes for pigmentation on that one. Okay, so let's go back to our slide. And so, as I mentioned, besides the skin, hair and nails are a big part of the integument system. Some of the glands are also discussed here as well. When we talk about the hair follicles themselves, you can actually get into some more detail with those. We do have some epidermal cells present. We're talking about the hair going all the way through the epidermis and dermis. And so you have a hair root, and there you have a hair bulb, and then the part that's above and through that epidermis, that's the hair shaft. That's the dead part. That's when you get your hair cut, you don't scream out in pain because those cells are dead. The papilla, that's the area that you're going to end up having blood vessels around that are going to give you some nutrients there. And then your particular hair color is going to be due to the amount of melanin pigmentation you have. The more you have, the darker it'll be. And also mentioned earlier, here's an erector pili muscle. That's when you get goosebumps that causes your hair to stand up. The nails, when we look at those structures, if you do a cross section right here, here is some bone. When we talk about bone, we're going to talk about compact and spongy bone. We also have some tissue plus some also fat tissue there. But we have what we consider the nail bed, the nail plate, the free edge. That's the part that's coming off that we clip. And we have this above the cuticle area, we have this structure called lanula. And it's called that because it looks moon-like. So those are actual protective coverings then for the tips of the fingers. Here's some of the glands, the sebaceous glands. When we talk about those, a lot of times we're considering those around hair. And some people have glands that will release a lot of oil rapidly versus those that don't. And that's another thing. As you get older, you lose that oil release. So you may know somebody that's elderly that has said that they don't wash their hair 3 or 4 times every 3 or 4 days. And that's because those sebaceous glands are not releasing oil like they did before. And then when we talk about teenagers, kids going through puberty, they tend to release that quite a bit. So they're washing their hair every day because it's getting so oily. And you don't see those. You don't have that oily feeling that you do with your hair that you do with your feet or with your palms of your hand. You have more sweat glands there. Sweat glands, pseudoauriferous. A lot of times we talk about those, especially when we look at those in the axillary area, the armpit. We also have those that are throughout the whole body because of when you get hot and you start to sweat. So they're within the skin all over. We got a lot of those that can be in the dermis, but some of those can actually reach down into that hypodermis area as well. And so here's a picture of different types of glands. There's the oil gland, but then here's a sweat gland. Both of those are different types of sweat glands. Where you see the word ceremoniousous, then we talk about them being waxy type of glands. Homeostasis, and I mentioned this at the very beginning, part of that is regulating your body's temperature. So if it's talking about something causes your temperature to get higher, maybe you go outside in the hot sun in the afternoon in August, your body temperature starts to rise above that normal, whatever normal might be for you. 98.6 is what we tell everybody, 37 degrees Celsius. But what we find is certain people run a certain temperature all the time, but that's just an average that we use. So let's say your body temperature starts to get up, closer to 100, then you've got thermoreceptors within the nervous system that are going to send a signal to the brain to say, hey, you know what, we're getting awful hot, we need to do something about it. And so that is sending information to the hypothalamus. And that's the point that's going to send information back to the body to say, all right, we need to get our sweat glands going. We're going to open up those blood vessels and release sweat glands and heat. And so we lose that heat to the surroundings around us so that we start to cool off. And then basically just the opposite, if we're getting too chilly, the temperature gets below what our body's accustomed to, then those thermoreceptors again are going to send information to the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus is going to say, all right, we need to constrict those blood vessels We need to keep the sweat glands under control. But what we need to do is start shivering and get our muscles to do this involuntary contraction, so that as that happens, we start to release, to heat up, release heat energy through those muscles. So we have the built-in mechanisms to help us control our body temperature. Everybody's had some type of wound, from something as simple as a paper cut to some kind of traumatic thing. Unfortunately, some have had. So what does our skin do? Well, our body has that built-in mechanism, that homeostasis we want to be in. So what it's going to do right away, it's going to cause some edema, some swelling. Sometimes it's going to release some histamines to cause the the vessels that are disrupted to become more permeable, and that's going to start your immune system to start sending, I guess what you can call cells, warriors to that area to start taking care of that problem. The blood vessels are going to open up because they're going to be more permeable to fluids, and some swelling is going to take place. So swelling is not always a bad thing. That's just your body's way of saying you need to slow down and take care of this. So as we have blood vessels dilating, a lot of times they dilate and they push on nerve cells, and that's where some of that pain starts to come in. So we've got some redness going on. It's going to be more warmer in that area. That inflammation is going to take place, and then some pain. So some of the neutrophils, those are types of white blood cells. Those are the ones that you have the most white blood cells percentage-wise in your body, around 60 to 70%. They're going to come into that area where there's a wound or a cut. They're going to start sending out some chemical messengers that are going to tell some other white blood cells to come in there. You're going to have a protein called fibrin that is produced from fibrinogen that's going to help your clotting to start, hopefully. And then we have what we call protein growth factors that are going to help the vessel and the tissue start to repair. And then any of the debris or junk that we don't want in there, we have other white blood cells, some macrophages that come in there and basically eat up and take care of that debris. And then sometimes you'll end up with, it depends on how severe the wound is, you could have some scar tissue build up, and a lot of that's from some of the collagen fibers, tough protein fibers that are there. And when we talk about, as kids, for example, when you would fall and maybe get a knee burn or something like that, all of this was taking place, the neutrophils, the fibrin and so forth, the clotting, drawing the vessels back and repairing the tissue. Then you'd start to get to the point where a scab would form, and the drying out of the scab, but also the contractile proteins in there would cause that scab to start to itch and so forth, and that's where as a kid you want to try to take that off. But we know that's part of that healing process. We do have a protein plasmin that's there to stop the clotting process when we're done with it. We don't want it to continue forever. So we also have a shut-off mechanism that's going to help us with that. Also with skin, we have to consider different levels of burns, first, second, and third degree. And if you've ever grabbed something hot off the stove, you might, or maybe a quick touch with a curling iron, you might have experienced a first degree. You got a little pain. It's basically hit the epidermis, little redness occurring. If you've ever gone out and got a sunburn before, then you've experienced second degree burns. That's where you have the blisters forming. Now not only are you into the epidermis, you've got underneath to the dermis, red, blistering, and painful. The skin starts to feel kind of taut and tight. And then, of course, the worst one then is a third degree burn. That's when you get from epidermis, dermis to hypodermis involved, sometimes even the muscle underneath that. Now you're looking at the point where you're needing some type of skin graft. And like I mentioned here, it would be like if you put yourself on a grill, like instead of a steak. You're just basically burning up protein. So there's different types of grafts, skin grafts, that can take place. One of the best ones that you could have would be an autograft, where you may take tissue from somewhere else on your body, and then that is actually isolated and cultured and then placed on you later on. The isograft, that's where if you have a twin, you can take tissue from the twin and culture that and replace an area that has third-degree burns. If we're talking about a homograft, now we're talking about another individual that's not a twin or not yourself. So usually, sometimes they can actually take those from cadavers and use those. And then a xenograft would be from a completely different species. Like we talk about using pig valves and so forth for hearts. We can actually use the other types of animals to use for a graft, or skin graft. So depends on, like I said, what level you are on, what you have to do to take care of it. One of the biggest concerns with third-degree burn is not only infection but dehydration of that area. So here's a pictures of each. Now this one would be more common. Some people can get a sunburn that doesn't have any blistering on it. Here this person's finally blistering. And then if you look down here at this one, this black area, this is a third-degree burn. Basically the black is the carbon that you have left. Here's an ideal of what we look at called the rule of nines, when somebody tries to determine the severity of a third-degree burn, how the trunk is broken up into 18% of the body, and then the extremities, the arms and legs, are broken up into 9% for each of the legs, 4.5% for the arms. So the front and the back, if that's a burnt on a person, that's considered 36% of the body. The head and neck area, we're talking about 9% there as well. So that's how they determine the severity of a third-degree burn. Now, as we get older, here's some things that happen to our integument system. The skin becomes scaly. So you might want to think of somebody, maybe a grandparent, older person that you know, and you can use this as a comparison to age spots. Epidermis thins. That's why you see a lot of elderly people that will have a lot of bruises, for example, by just bumping into things. The epidermis is thinner, plus they don't have as much of that hypodermis left, so they have a loss of fat. They still have blood flow through there, so that's why it bruises so bad. The dermis itself is going to become thinner as well. Wrinkling, the elastin is not as prominent as it used to be, so there's more wrinkling and sagging of the skin, and the sagging part also comes from losing tissue over time. Don't have as much oil glands secreting like you did before. The melanin, the pigmentation, starts to slow, so that's why you see some of the hair turning gray. Thinning of hair over time. Most of the hair itself, not only the hair thins, you've got hair follicles decreasing. The nail growth doesn't, it still occurs, but not as fast. Over time, your skin, if it's thinning, you don't have the sensory areas that you do before. Body temperature, you know, that's something that falls as well. You may have gone into some elderly person's house in the summertime and they've got the house like 150 degrees. That's because they don't have that body fat as much as they used to, so they're getting cooler and cooler and having trouble with it. And then also not being able to take care of some vitamin D activation. Now, what I also want to show you, if we go back, here is the web anatomy. And here is a picture of 10 structures, and this comes from Solomon's. So let's take a look. If we look at these terms, erector pili muscle, arterial dermis, epidermis, hypodermis, sweat gland, motor nerve, sensory nerve, stratum corneum, sweat gland, and venule. Now, stratum corneum, anytime you see that word stratum, it means layer. And you've got different layers in this epidermis. And then also, if we're talking motor versus sensory nerve, sensory takes in the incoming stimulus. motor nerve is going to be the response to it. So let's just go through and I'll randomly pick ones again because of time. And like I said, you can go in here and you can do these repeatedly and figure out which ones you do know and which ones you don't know, and only spend that time on the ones you're having trouble with. And don't forget, you can score the test, and over here to the right it'll tell you the actual correct answers. It'll also tell you that, you know, what your score was. You can tell by what was graded wrong over here and so forth. So there's the integument skin 1, and here's an actual slide which doesn't show that very well. But this one only has, this is just of the dermis and epidermis. Okay, and so there's the stratums, the different layers. These are all layers of the epidermis. So if you randomly just pick everything here the same, or just go through. All right, so corneum, luciderm, granulosum, spinosum, germinativum, and the dermis. And when you look at these different layers, the corneum is what we consider the more dead, more tough layer. Luciderm, more clear. Granulosum actually has some structures in there that look like spiky structures. Same along with the spinosum. The germ layer, that's where you have a lot of cell division going on. So all first 5 of those, that would be part of your epidermis. So let's also go back to Google Images. And take a look at the epidermis layers. And here's a good one right here. What it'll also show you, here's the stratum basal. Basal just means the basement or the lower layer. Here's spinosum, where you're going to have some more spiky structures. Granulosum, where you're going to have more that are being able to pick up stain, more granulated. Luciderm, more of a clear one. And your stratum corneum is that more of a dead layer that we take a look at. Let's look at one more. This should have a decent one too. And so there's another look at it. So this is what I'm talking about. Make sure you go back and do this image on Google to give you some ideas. What's nice about this one, not only is it looking at the different layers, it's telling you other common names of them, plus also talking about what the structures look like. Melanin cells, mostly in that basal layer. When we talk about the spinosum layer, there's where you've got a lot of input from moisture for the skin, a lot of that collagen's being produced and so forth. So we get cell division. Those cells are going to be going up through these layers because we've got to remember we slough off thousands of skin cells every day. And so we need some mitosis to be occurring and those moving up towards the top. And there's one more. Okay? All right. So that's all we've got for today, taking a look at the integument system. I do want you to also take time to go into more detail. For example, when you look at Google Images again, although your notes don't go into detail as much about hair and nails, also take a closer look at those. We just had maybe 2 or 3 structures listed. Here's one that has some more. Notice what's going on with there. There's a term called hyponechium. opposite of that cuticle. Also, same thing with hair structures. I would suggest you do a cross section as well. Because you can find the ones that have the hair down into the skin. Let's do specifically hair structure cross section. And then take a look at the different layers involved there. Let's take a look at this one, for example. It's a pretty good one. Because what you're going to find is there's different types of tissue even around the strand of hair. Here's some connective tissue. We're going to talk about different things like these little red structures are part of the melanins, or these brown ones inside here. You'll also notice that we talk about a cuticle, even for hair, a covering. Medulla is a more, when you hear the term medulla, we're talking inner structure. Cortex means outer structure. But take a good look at what we call a longitudinal section of a labeled picture of a strand of hair, and also a cross section. Because I'm pretty sure you're going to have to end up labeling or discussing some of those, no matter what you take. Okay, so like I said, that's all we have for today. Make sure you go through and practice on that web anatomy site. Also, make sure you go through Google labeled images and look at some structures there, along with your text and also your PowerPoint, and that should be good enough.